Welcome to Fate Unknown. Returned. No windows, holes in the roof, the floors are damp. 116 subjects for the graveyard. These lines recur across scattered papers. They do not argue. They mark an absence in plain script. From all I can learn and see, the colored people are outraged beyond humanity. Houses have been torn down. One woman and her 8 children lay out last night. 2 colored women were found by the Jackson Road with their throats cut. A request follows for laws that will give protection. The reply is not attached. Their cabins are an assemblage of huts, floors on or near the ground. No windows, holes in the roofs. In wet weather, bedding is wet. The floors remain damp. The same page counts the graves. The numbers increase without names. He went by night. He carried a note and did not sign. He was seen at the ford and not after. The road was opened before daylight. No engineer detachment is credited. The name is not recorded. The file moves on to rations. Dispatches were received from colored sources. Scouts from the contraband camp report. Maps were improved by local knowledge. A guide is not named. A runner arrived with information, identity omitted. The column advanced. She states that he guided the column for 2 nights. She cannot produce a muster entry. No officer can swear the same. The claim is rejected for want of proof. The widow insists he was in service. The paperwork does not show. The petition is closed. They sang low to carry the road. A drum was touched, not beaten. The lantern was shielded by the hand. A word passed from mouth to mouth. Do not write it. Remember it. The route held until morning. He wrote that he is here but cannot write where. The pass will be taken if named. He crossed the water at the second bend. Tell mother to listen at the gate. If I do not return, do not come searching. No place is written on the cover. The date is uncertain. There was a list. Names were scratched and then crossed. Returned stands beside 1, then nothing. Fate Unknown stands beside 2. The paper is folded in quarters. The date is smudged. The clerk's hand changes mid-page. A chaplain records a burial without a stone. A steward notes a runner but not his name. A surgeon writes that a message came in time. A quartermaster writes that a road was passable. A paymaster writes not found on rolls. The file closes. The ledger totals reconcile. Old people remember a road not on the map. A bridge that burned without a match. A horse that knew the ford by scent. A song that says wait for the second light. A dream that says he is near. Morning reports nothing. The map remains unchanged. The regiment mustered out. The town did not take the testimony. The paper asked for witnesses who were already dead. The office returned the petition. The widow waited another season. The ledger stayed blank. The child learned the dates by hearing. An officer wrote that the work was done. The map improved. The column moved. The enemy flank unhinged. Attribution omitted. The day recorded as fair. The report filed among routine matters. They said he was with us in the dark. He did not stand in the line at daylight. No one called his name at roll. Someone said he turned back to close the gate. Someone said he crossed by the mill. No one wrote again. The camp dispersed. 1 drum far off. 1 road worn without a cart. 1 file marked complete with gaps. 1 letter without a place name. 1 widow without a voucher. 1 year that ended without ending. This is the record as it stands. This inquiry fixes its temporal scope before any interpretation. The working window is January to December 1865, with limited backward reach into late 1864, where actions begun in winter conclude in spring, and limited forward reach into 1866 to 1870, where depositions and pensions refer back to wartime duties. The aim is not breadth, but traceability across contiguous months. Entries that cannot be dated within this band are held in reserve and not used to drive conclusions. Ambiguous items are logged separately for later comparison. The objective is a file that can be read, tested, and replicated. Geography is centered on 4 corridors where paper density is sufficient to follow movement. The western approaches to Petersburg and Richmond in Virginia form the first cluster. The Jackson-Vicksburg Road in Mississippi forms the second. The Memphis-Grand Junction rail line and nearby crossings in West Tennessee form the third. The Arkansas River line between Little Rock and Pine Bluff forms the fourth. Peripheral references outside these corridors are noted but do not determine argument. Units and posts provide the operational frame for reading traces. United States colored troops, infantry, and heavy artillery regiments stationed along these corridors supply the majority of dated entries. Adjacent posts, depots, hospitals, contraband, or freedmen camps and telegraph nodes supply context for night movement, courier duties, and local guidance. Where a post diary or return exists, it anchors the timeline for nearby civilian and relief papers. When a unit is detached to an outpost, its morning reports and returns help index unexplained movements before dawn. The intent is to reduce reliance on single-genre evidence. Federal records form the core documentary base. Adjutant General's Office papers provide enlistment muster and consolidated returns that show presence and absence at scale. Quartermaster and subsistence ledgers log roads opened, bridges serviced, and wagons forwarded, including notations of routes opened at unusual hours. Engineer papers are consulted where available, but are often silent on improvised guidance. Bureau of Refugees, Freedmen, and Abandoned Lands files supply monthly sub-district reports, hospital returns, and correspondence written in plain terms about local conditions. Commissioner of Pensions case files carry post-war narratives where formal roles do not capture irregular duties. State and private records supplement federal paper where federal lines thin. State adjutant annual reports sometimes abstract letters from field officers acknowledging assistance without personal names. County dockets and coroner inquests record deaths on roads near posts in 1865 when jurisdictions overlap. Relief agency letters, prominently the American Missionary Association, mention messengers by given name in the context of supplies and notices between schools and camps. Church registers list burials tied to camps or forts and occasionally label a deceased person as runner or unknown soldier. These sources are uneven but sometimes provide rare links between place month and function. Newspapers are used with caution for their habit of naming white principals while omitting black participants. Short items in garrison and capital papers record alarms, arrests, assaults, and road incidents near military corridors. When matched by a federal or county paper, such items help place an event on the calendar. When unmatched, they are logged but not used to assert a pattern. Editorial comment is excluded. Only dated incident notes are retained. The method avoids moral inference from newspaper tone and keeps attention on verifiable logistics and administration. Oral testimony and song fragments are late but relevant as maps of function. Federal Writers Project interviews taken in the late 1930s across Arkansas, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Texas include recollections of passwords, night roads, and errands to posts by elders who were adolescents in 1865. These are not contemporaneous records and are not used to prove specific acts. They can reveal the distribution of practices when similar motifs repeat across counties without contact. Spirituals with localized verses naming a bend, a ferry, or a gate operate as memory anchors for families with partial paperwork. When dialect rendering by interviewers obscures wording, the item is flagged as stylized and its weight reduced. 2 recurring formulas. Structure the evidentiary difficulty. One formula is categorical credit without names, information received from colored sources, scouts from the contraband camp report route obtained from local hands. This hides identity at the point of action and is common in staff correspondence. The other formula is administrative denial at the point of recompense claim rejected for want of proof not found on rolls, no officer to swear the same. This surfaces in pension and bounty cases when widows or parents assert guiding or runner service. Occasional bridging documents name a black, non-commissioned officer or civilian who guided or carried dispatches, but these outliers cannot be taken as typical. To avoid circular reasoning, a minimal unit of analysis is defined. A trace exists when 2 independent documents describe the same outcome within the same narrow window with details that complement rather than copy. A quartermaster ledger noting a route opened by dawn, a regimental morning report placing a unit forward before daylight, and a freedmen's sub-district letter noting hands summoned to guide a column together satisfy the condition. None alone identifies who guided. Together they establish that guidance occurred and that attribution failed. A pension file from the same county and month asserting guiding duties but rejected for lack of role corroboration strengthens the inference without naming the actor. Locations are stated precisely to test repeatability. In Virginia, March-April 1865, papers along the Boydtown Plank Road sector contain before-dawn movements with no engineers credited. In Mississippi, May-June 1865, freedmen letters on the Jackson Road describe assaults on black travelers and requests for passes or patrols for messengers. In West Tennessee, bridge watches and alarms appear in rail protection files while county notes mention young men called to guide detachments to safe crossings. In Arkansas, assistant superintendent's reports list camp disease and burials, alongside notes of messages delivered from camp sources that reached posts in time to alter a road decision. Names of officials are recoverable. Names of black guides and runners are sparse. Assistant commissioners, post commanders, adjutants, surgeons, quartermasters, and pension examiners sign their papers and can be placed on a calendar. Affidavits taken years later sometimes preserve given names or nicknames of black actors, yet examiners often criticize the lack of surnames or mismatched spellings against rolls. This is not a feature of one office or one state. It appears in multiple jurisdictions. The pattern indicates structural limits on how irregular service entered official systems. Storage and access conditions shape knowledge. Federal record groups are cataloged and partially digitized, but microfilm runs and indices vary in completeness. State adjutant reports are printed, but often lack the appended letters that would tie incidents to persons. County and coroner books differ widely in survival and organization. Church registers may be local and require permission. Descriptions can be minimal. Relief agency papers are dispersed across denominational and university holdings and may be described only at the folder level. Writers' project typescripts survive in state and national collections with uneven fidelity between verbatim and paraphrase. The consequence is methodical reading rather than selective quotation. Negative evidence is treated as its own class. When a night route is logged as opened and no engineer memorandum exists for that span, the absence counts toward a failure of attribution, not toward denial of action. When a widow's claim names an officer verified as present by returns, yet is rejected for lack of a roll entry describing guiding service, the rejection counts toward the system's inability to carry irregular tasks. Negative evidence cannot identify a person. It can demonstrate that the paper apparatus was not calibrated to record hybrid roles situated between enlisted service and auxiliary labor. A single narrow question guides the file-by-file reading. Where a movement warning or route change in 1865 is documented without naming the black actor who enabled it, do later papers from the same corridor and month pensions, depositions, relief letters, or folklore recollections indicate that such actors existed performing that class of tasks. If the answer repeats across corridors, the inference of structural necessity paired with structural occlusion gains strength. If it does not repeat, the pattern described in Part 1 is limited and not systemic. The reader is invited to test each citation against this question rather than against sentiment. A human detail is recorded here without interpretation because it touches collection, not theory. A field worker who copied testimonies related to freedmen travel and later gathered reminiscences for a county project is listed as missing after a routine trip between two settlements. The year is 2 years after his last transcript in the file. The road he traveled is the same road named in multiple wartime entries as a night path for messengers. The notation is brief and unadorned in the county papers. The sentence is placed on the record exactly. The field worker who recorded this testimony vanished 2 years later on the same road. Constraints for use are set so the reader understands limits. Quotations from contemporaneous papers are minimal and serve to anchor dates, places, actions, and administrative results. Folklore. Interviews and songs are used as indicators of practice distribution and memory anchoring, never as sole proof of a particular event or person. No causal chain is asserted without document-to-document linkage that can be inspected. Items with broken custody or unclear provenance are flagged and held short of argument. The study proceeds corridor by corridor so that aggregation is visible rather than implied. The next part will assemble early clusters in each corridor with dates and offices attached. The aim is to let the paper show movement before any explanatory layer is proposed. Where names appear, they will be carried forward. Where they do not, functions will be tracked. The expectation is not resolution of identity, but clarity about mechanism. If the file remains silent on actors, the silence itself will be described as a feature of the system. If a name emerges with sufficient linkage, it will be presented without enlargement. The record determines the scope of claim. A notice appears in a county newspaper in early 1865, set in small type, offering a reward for a man formerly held to service last seen near a military road suspected of passing within the lines. The text lists height, scars, clothing, and the possibility that he associates with colored troops. The notice supplies no road name and no witnesses. It does, however, fix a corridor and a week. The paper's business office handled the fee. The sheriff's docket for the same month carries no arrest. In the same county, an elderly singer tells a verse that names a bend in the river and warns not to call a name at the ford. The verse is not a prayer, it is a map reduced to memory. The refrain directs a listener to wait for a second light, not the first. The singer attributes the lines to wartime people on the road, not to any church leader. The words are stable across two interviews taken years apart. A Freedmen's Bureau subassistant reports an assault upon a colored man bearing messages between the camp and the post, adding that the victim refused to state the employing officer. The report encloses a physician's note of injuries and a request for a pass system to regulate night travel by trustworthy persons. There is no pass roster attached to the file. The Post returns for the same week show an unusual number of picket challenges after midnight but no enemy contact. A short narrative recorded in the 1930s recalls the road watcher, a young man who sat behind a fence board at the mouth of a lane and counted wagons by sound while facing away from the road. The teller insists that looking on the road could pull trouble, and that a finger laid across a drumhead not beating it could mark time for moving when the watcher's count reached a number agreed upon beforehand. The narrative is precise about the fence board and imprecise about dates. A regimental morning report notes a before-dawn advance along a lateral track previously considered impassable for wagons. The quartermaster ledger for that day logs a smaller forage issue than expected because the route cut miles off the circuit. An aide's memorandum mentions assistance from camp sources and adds that no engineers were present. The documents align on movement but do not provide a name. The timing aligns with a labor shortage entry at the contraband camp, 5 able-bodied men absent overnight. An oral account from a neighboring county states that Boys was called for 2 nights to walk the mud first, then return by the fence rows without speaking to the soldiers who followed. The account does not claim the boys were enlisted. It does not mention pay. It explains in matter-of-fact terms that the first feet teach the wheel where to go and that the first return should be silent to prevent someone from counting back. The teller names no officer, no unit, no post, only the sequence. A clerk in a provost marshal's office writes a short letter to a county justice asking whether the coroner has investigated 2 dead colored women reported by travelers on the Jackson Road. The justice replies that no inquest has been undertaken due to lack of competent testimony. In the Freedmen's Bureau file for the same district, a borrowed horse is returned with signs of use beyond the stated errand, and a complaint is recorded that women have been compelled to sleep outside for want of protection. None of the papers link the entries. They remain parallel. A woman interviewed late in life says that women kept talk for night in their mouths and spit it in the morning, meaning that information gathered in darkness stayed unspoken until a safe hour. She describes placing a tin over a lantern to narrow the beam and bending the wrist to keep the light parallel to the ground. She claims a drum hush, not a drum beat, was used to find each other near the yard gate. She also claims that names were not spoken at all, only kinship words, and that the habit remained long after. A hospital register lists runner from fort among the dead of dysentery in May, no surname, no age. The register places the burial in a corner of a civilian ground because the military cemetery was not yet allotted. The post chaplain's monthly return lists funerals conducted and omits that burial. A paymaster's later note on a widow's claim from the same county reads not found on rolls, and no officer corroborates guiding duty. The widow's affidavit contains a careful timeline of errands to the picket. It is annotated insufficient. A dream account enters 3 separate interviews from 2 families who did not know each other. In each, a relative hears a voice say, "Second bend," and walks to a particular tree at dawn. Nothing is there. The families do not derive doctrine from the dreams. They derive a practice to watch that place if messengers failed to return. The account is not used here to establish a meeting. It is used to show how a community creates an anchor point when paper does not carry a name home. A state adjutant's annual report summarizes a letter from a field officer praising local colored men who guided a detachment to a ford not marked on public maps. The summary does not copy the men's names. The original letter is not appended. A newspaper in the state capital runs a small item on the same week about effective operations against guerrillas. The item names 2 white officers. The timing and location align with the adjutant's summary. The language is similar enough to imply a shared source. It does not restore the missing names. A preacher's notebook from the Reconstruction period includes a short line, "Sing low to carry the road," next to a list of funerals and baptisms. There is no sermon attached. The line may be a reminder to keep volume down when traveling after night services. It is not a directive, not a creed, and not a law. It is a technique recorded in an administrative hand. Its presence in a notebook, otherwise filled with names and dates, suggests that sound discipline functioned as a mundane rule of movement. A court letter from a county seat in West Tennessee acknowledges receipt of a petition from a woman stating that her husband served as guide at officers' request during the months of March and April for 2 nights at a time. The court replies that service not set forth on rolls cannot be credited toward a pension and that no officer has responded to inquiry. The file includes a marginal note, names heard Tom Little Isaac, no surnames. The handwriting changes mid-page, indicating the clerk's handover. A short camp saying is recorded by a relief worker and repeated in 2 counties. Do not call a road by its right name after dark. The worker interprets it as superstition. It is at minimum a rule of operational silence. The same worker notes that boys learned the ford by smell and that women folded the pass in breadcloths. Such notes are not evidence of specific events but are consistent with households devising practical means to conceal and move information. A telegraph log references delivery from hand to wire at an hour when the office was nominally closed. The notation is made by an operator who rarely comments on origin. The message is routine, a correction in wagon counts, and a change in fuel issue for the morning. An ordnance return for the next day shows slightly altered ammunition distribution along a lateral road. A single night courier cannot be proven by these entries, but the entries together point to a piece of knowledge arriving outside normal hours and reshaping small logistics at dawn. An account from a man who was a child in 1865 says that he and others were instructed to stand 2 fence posts back from any lane when soldiers passed, and to look at the ground, not at faces. He was told that looking might make a man visible to the wrong eyes. He remembers that one older boy went away to walk the mud and show the ruts, and did not return. His mother would leave a plate at the gate on nights when a wind came from the bend. The account is careful with acts and careless with dates. A cluster of documents from the Arkansas River line in early 1865 describes squalid camp conditions, high mortality from exposure and disease, and the use of hands from camp to move messages between post and settlements. A medical officer's report calls for improvements. A quartermaster calls for more wagons. A sub-assistant calls for a pass system to protect specific persons. The improvements arrive late. The pass system is debated in letters but not enacted in the form described. The phrase "hands from camp" persists in monthly summaries with no list attached. 2 late testimonies from the region mention lanterns with a tin lid and a second light aligning with verses cited elsewhere. Neither testimony claims a miracle. Both claim a habit of keeping one light shielded and another to be shown briefly when a watcher had counted a certain number of wheels. The pattern is practical and repeatable. The testimonies align without sharing a teller or a county. They serve here as indicators of technique likely used across adjacent settlements. The alternating strands do not close on an identity. They do, however, form a repeatable arrangement administrative papers that map movement risk and result without restoring individual names. Community recollections that preserve methods, waypoints, and cautions without supplying official corroboration. The arrangement does not produce sentiment. It produces a question that is small and exact when papers say a route opened before dawn and name no guide, and when families in that place remember rules for opening routes in darkness. What is the proper weight to give the unnamed actor whose function is visible while the name is not? The next part enumerates the incidents that rise in complexity under that question. Report: no survivors were found. Oral record: but the drums still answered that night. The post return lists the hour of the search and the sector walked by lantern, concluding without names. The road list for the same week notes a route reopened by dawn. A widow's later statement places her husband on that road after midnight carrying a folded note to the picket. The next line is missing. Only one word remains: returned. Quartermaster Ledger Road opened before daylight. No engineers present. Oral testimony: 2 boys walked the mud first so the wheels would learn. The morning report credits rapid movement over difficult ground, assigning no guide. A relief letter mentions breadcloths used to hide a pass. The pass is not in the file. The margin bears an index hand and no cross-reference. Surgeon's note: message arrived in time to divert wagons to lateral road. Song fragment: wait for the second light by the bend. The telegraph log gives the receipt time and operator initials origin listed as hand to wire. A county clerk records a complaint of assault on a colored traveler after dark. The docket shows no witness able to identify the attackers. The docket closes for lack of testimony deemed competent. Provost memorandum. Disturbance reported near trestle. Found no enemy. Old man's recollection. A drum was touched, not beaten, to tell us when to move. The rail file logs a watch set at 2-hour intervals through the night. A coroner's book in the same week lists unknown colored male found near creek bank. The coroner cites no inquest due to jurisdictional confusion. The page is smudged where a name would be entered. Adjutant abstract local colored men guided detachment to unmarked ford. Capital newspaper. Successful action against guerrillas naming 2 white officers and no others. Oral account. Do not call a road by its right name after dark. The state report does not attach the original letter. The newspaper item repeats the location but alters the order of events. The next line is missing. Hospital register runner from fort deceased, burial in civilian ground. Church book, buried a soldier, unknown by name from camp. Family recollection. A plate left at the gate on nights when the wind came from the bend. The chaplain's monthly return omits the burial. A pension examiner later writes not found on rolls. No officer corroborates guiding duty. The widow writes again and receives the same reply. Engineer file silence for the night. A lateral route is recorded as opened. Quartermaster file precise mileage saved and forage conserved. Song sing low to carry the road. A post commander's letter thanks hands from camp without enumeration. A freedmen's subassistant requests a pass system for trustworthy persons traveling by night. The request is acknowledged and not implemented in the proposed form. Sheriff's advertisement reward for a man formerly held to service last seen near the military road. Freedman office complaint of houses torn down and women sleeping outside. Roadwatcher narrative. A boy counted wagons by sound from behind a fence board and did not look on the road. County paper brief notice of night alarm. Order restored. The names attached to the complaint are not reused in the notice. The next line is missing. Morning report. Before dawn, movement accomplished. Position gained. Widow's affidavit. He guided the column for 2 nights. Examiner's ruling. Claim rejected for want of proof. No officer swears the same. A second affidavit offers nicknames only. The clerk annotates no surnames. Spelling uncertain. Oral record. He turned back to close the gate. He crossed by the mill. No one wrote again. Post inventory. 1. Lantern returned with tin lid damaged. Origin unclear. Recollection. Keep one light covered and show a second light once. Telegraph office delivery out of hours. Operator on premises for repair. Road incident note assault upon colored travelers near mile marker. Patrol dispatched. Patrol report. No persons found upon arrival. Ledger fuel issue adjusted for morning wagons. Regimental return. 5 men absent from camp overnight. Labor shortage noted. Relief workers journal. Boys asked to walk the mud, then go home by the fence rows. Counter entry. No formal detail ordered. A church register makes a marginal note. Young men called 2 nights. Choir late. County archive. No permit records for the week. The record has spaces that imply forms not used. Assistant superintendent's monthly cabin floors damp. Bedding wet. Mortality high. Oral recollection. Women spit the night words in the morning when it was safe. The medical officer calls for improvements in supplies. The quartermaster calls for more wagons and better roads. The camp's burial list increases by count, not by name. The next line is missing. Only one word remains returned. Pension case file. Widow claims guiding service during March and April. Officer not responding to inquiry. Post letter book that officer transferred and later resigned. No forwarding address provided. Family memory. He said, "Do not come searching if I did not return." The examiner repeats not on rolls. The file concludes with total amounts disbursed 0. The envelope bears a later hand reopened insufficient. Bridge watch log. Alarm at 1:40. Investigated. No enemy. Oral story. A horse knew the ford by scent. Ordnance return. Slight redistribution along lateral road. Newspaper rumors of spies exaggerated. A county docket notes colored man injured near trestle. No charges. A relief letter states borrowed horse returned with signs of use. The lines do not converge on a person. Post chaplain's list funerals conducted. Names attached where known. Church book funerals and baptisms entered. A side note reads, "Sing low to carry the road." Song verse a bend named a gate mentioned a warning not to speak names. The chaplain's totals reconcile with the post's mortality figures minus the runner from Fort. The runner's entry is legible in the hospital book and absent here. The margin shows no correction. County letter inquest, not undertaken, due to lack of testimony. Bureau letter protection requested for women and children sleeping outdoors after threats. Family phrase. Keep talk for night in the mouth and spit it in the morning. The sheriff's book records the reward advertisement and no resolution. The field note that might have joined the items is not present. The next line is missing. Rail Guard roster names of white sergeants on duty. Columns for men present filled in numbers. Oral memory. A lookout with a hand over the lantern. The Guard report includes no unusual occurrences, while a telegraph operator notes wire-tested message delivered by hand. A freight ledger the next morning shows altered timings for 2 cars. No person is credited with the adjustment. Adjutant's memorandum route obtained from local hands. Relief circular. Please issue passes to persons known to your office. Examiner's marginalia on a pension claim. No officer to swear the same. Family account. We used kinship words, not names. The memorandum moves through the file as routine. The circular is filed with noted. The claim ends without award. Camp register. 5 men absent, overnight, returned. Oral record. 2 boys called for 2 nights and then sent home. A later note in the register strikes through returned beside 1 entry. No reason given. The church book in that week lists 1 burial unknown from camp. The newspaper runs a 2-line brief order restored after disturbance. The documents align in time and not in attribution. Morning hearing at the county seat. A woman presents a letter that mentions hands from the camp. The justice asks for a roll entry. None exists. The woman gives 2 given names, Tom and Little Isaac. The clerk notes the names and writes no surnames. The file receives the stamp completed. The oral record says they walked the mud first. The paper says insufficient. Final juxtaposition for this section. Report no survivors were found. Oral record. But the drums still answered that night. Ledger Road opened before daylight. Song wait for the second light. Pension file claim rejected for want of proof. Church book, buried a soldier unknown by name. The next line is missing. Only 1 word remains, returned. Migration map, a printed sheet from the late 1860s, traces exits from river counties toward rail towns and prairie edges, arrows drawn from garrison roads to new settlements, labeled only by county. The arrows thicken along the Jackson Corridor and the Arkansas line, indicating sustained movement after the war's end. A legend marks seasons and approximate counts. No individual names are attached to the arrows. The sheet is administrative and impersonal. Spiritual verse recorded decades later names the same corridor without a compass walk past the bend. Hold your tongue until the second light, do not say the road's right name. The verse does not mark counties or seasons. It repeats a rule of movement carried by memory. The place indicators overlap the map's arrows but appear in the form of lines to be sung, not lines to be measured. Reconstruction testimony. A freedman deposes that he traveled at night between camp and post with a paper from an officer and was turned back twice by men without badges. He gives month, road, and an officer's surname. The clerk asks for a pass list. None is produced. The deposition is bound with others concerning labor contracts and assaults. It is legible, dated, and stamped. Family practice notes kept in a preacher's notebook from the same county say, sing low to carry the road and keep 1 lantern covered. The line sits between entries for baptisms and burials. It is not a sermon. It functions as a rule for safe travel after night services. The notebook supplies no officer's name and no docket number. It holds a technique in plain writing. Soldier's letter, a sergeant in a United States Colored Troops regiment, writes that a lateral track previously marked impassable was used before daylight to gain a position. He credits help at hand and lists no engineers. The letter mentions less wear on men and animals and a shorter forage issue. He encloses no map and names no guide. The letter is preserved in a unit file. An elder's account in a Federal Writers Project interview states that boys were called for 2 nights to walk the mud first and go home by the fence rows without looking at the soldiers. The teller does not place himself under orders. He does not claim pay. He recites an order of actions and a boundary line of behavior. The sequence aligns with a road made passable before daylight without engineers. Newspaper column, a garrison town weekly, prints a brief notice of night alarm, order restored. It places the incident near a trestle and gives the hour. No names are printed for black participants. 2 white officers are named in connection with responses. The notice closes with a statement of resumed normalcy. The file for that week contains no correction or follow-up. A short road watcher story from the same area recounts a boy who faced away from the lane and counted wagons by sound. He was told not to look because looking could pull trouble. A drum is mentioned not struck but touched to mark time. The story supplies no hour and no trestle. It supplies a method and an inhibition designed to survive observation. County court letter: a widow petitions for recognition of her husband's guiding service in March and April, naming a detachment and an officer. The court replies that service not on rolls cannot be credited and that no officer has answered inquiry. A marginal note lists two given names, Tom and Little Isaac, with no surnames. The stamp reads completed. No award is entered. A household custom recorded by a relief worker notes that women folded passes in breadcloths and kept talk for night in the mouth, spitting it in the morning. The phrases are procedure, not display. The custom explains concealment without naming persons. It makes sense of petitions that fail for lack of paper, while acknowledging that paper was deliberately minimized during movement. Freedmen's Bureau Monthly: a sub-assistant requests a pass system for trustworthy persons traveling by night between camp and post. The request is acknowledged. No roster is attached. A separate entry records an assault on colored travelers on the Jackson Road and a need for patrols. The office keeps copies of outgoing and incoming letters. The month closes with statistics for schools and rations. A spiritual with localized language tells listeners to wait by the second light at the bend and not to call a road by its right name after dark. The song is not a pass. It is a memory device that carries two instructions: place and silence. Its persistence across counties aligns with repeated requests for structured night movement that could not be safely placed on lists. Post-hospital register runner from Fort Deceased burial in civilian ground, no surname, no age. The chaplain's monthly omits the entry. A church book records burial of a soldier unknown by name from camp. The totals in the post return reconcile mortality figures without the runner's name. The administrative shape is coherent. The individual vanishes inside it. A dream motif appears in 3 interviews from 2 unrelated families. The instruction to stand by the second bend at dawn if a messenger did not return, because that is where news finds you if paper does not. The motif does not claim a vision of a person. It assigns a place to uncertainty so that waiting can be organized. It mirrors the unnamed burial with a practice of designated watching. State adjutant's report: an abstract of a field officer's letter, praises local colored men who guided a detachment to an unmarked ford. The abstract does not carry the men's names. The original is not appended. A capital newspaper in the same week prints a success against guerrillas naming the officers. The alignment is close, but the personal detail remains absent from official paper. 2 late testimonies from different counties mention lanterns with a tin lid and the rule to show a second light once. The testimonies do not name soldiers or officers. They describe equipment adapted to hide and release light in measured ways. The device mirrors the official praise for guidance without restoring the guides' identities. Telegraph log delivery from hand to wire outside normal hours. Operator initials recorded. Origin listed as hand. Ordnance return next day shows small redistribution along a lateral road. A quartermaster ledger shows fuel issue adjusted for morning wagons by a modest amount. The chain is mundane and complete within its terms. No person is credited. A child's recollection entered late states that one older boy went to walk the mud and show the ruts and did not return. His mother left a plate at the gate when wind came from the bend. The recollection holds 2 facts: departure on a defined task and a household signal for unresolved return. It mirrors a log that records function while withholding the actor. Reconstruction labor contract. A foreman agrees to employ men from the camp on specified terms. A separate line says men may be called for night duty by post authority. The clause is vague. It permits removal of labor to undefined tasks. A later complaint alleges that men were taken and not returned on time. The paper shows permission without schedule or safeguard. A house prayer recorded in a margin by a lay leader ends with a practical line: keep the name under the tongue until safety. It is not doctrine. It is a rule of speech tied to movement and return. It mirrors vague clauses that move men without writing their names and becomes a protective habit where writing cannot protect. County docket inquest not undertaken due to lack of competent testimony regarding 2 dead colored women by the road. A provost letter asks whether the coroner has investigated. The justice replies in the negative. The docket closes for the term. No charges are brought. The documents show inquiry and closure without identification. A women's recollection states that names were replaced with kinship words when speaking about night travel. The practice removes identifiers that could be used in hostile settings while retaining relational sense inside the household. It mirrors the docket's failure, an event recorded with no persons attached. It is an internal safeguard where external process fails. Bridgewatch log alarm at 1:40 investigated no enemy found. Names of white sergeants present. Numbers for men on post. A freight ledger the next morning shows altered timings for 2 cars. The papers agree on disturbance investigation and routine resumption. There is no note on who reported the first sign. A short saying remembered by 2 tellers in nearby counties. A horse knows the ford by scent, and the boy who walks first keeps his eyes on the ground. The saying fixes responsibility without authority and makes the first observer hard to detect. It mirrors a log where an alarm enters, action follows, and the notifier disappears into the sequence. These pairs do not resolve identity. They draw a line where administration and memory meet and reflect each other's gaps. Maps carry arrows without names. Songs carry places without dates. Depositions fix months and officers. Household customs fix techniques that leave paper thin. Letters report help at hand. Elders recount rules that standardize help without signatures. Registers log runners and burials without surnames. Dream motifs assign a fixed point to wait when paper does not carry the person home. The reflection is not ornamental. It is functional, showing how acts that could not be written safely were remembered safely, and how acts that were written without attribution required internal rules to be carried forward. The next part will hold at the highest pressure point where risk and visibility peak, and will do so with the same terms, plain entries mirrored by plain recollections without analysis, so the reader can test where the reflection becomes indistinguishable from the thing reflected. The corridor is fixed by paper and by saying. A quartermaster line states road opened before daylight, no engineers present. A telegraph log adds delivery from hand to wire outside hours. A hospital register lists runner from fort deceased burial in civilian ground. A church book writes buried a soldier unknown by name from camp. A widow's petition receives not found on rolls. The docket closes without amendment. The river bend repeats in documents and in mouths. A soldier's letter marks a shorter circuit along a lateral track. A map adds no Ford name and shows no second light. A Freedmen's Bureau note requests passes for trustworthy persons traveling by night. A relief circular acknowledges and moves on. A song says, wait by the second light at the bend. The bend is stable while the names are not. The trestle carries alarms without faces. A railguard roster lists white sergeants by name and men by number. A telegraph operator initialed a line that a message came by hand. A freight ledger the next morning shows timings altered for 2 cars. A county book lists colored man injured near trestle, no charges. A road watcher story says count wagons by sound and do not look. The camp is entered by numbers and left by phrases. Assistant superintendent writes bedding wet floors, damp mortality high. The burial count increases without surnames attached. A chaplain lists funerals conducted, totals reconcile. A church book adds a side note, sing low to carry the road. Family practice says keep 1 lantern covered and show a second light once. The lantern appears in paper as damaged, origin unclear. The petitions repeat a form of silence. A widow states guiding service in March and April under an officer by surname. The examiner replies, claim rejected for want of proof, not on rolls. A marginal hand notes 2 given names, no surnames. The file is stamped completed. A county letter asks whether the coroner has investigated 2 dead colored women, no inquest undertaken. The next line is missing, a single word remains returned. The drum is persistent in recollection and procedural in effect. Accounts say it was touched, not beaten, to mark when to move. The drum is not on any inventory page provided here. The witness list is absent or deemed incompetent. A provost memorandum logs disturbance near trestle, found no enemy. Morning reports record before dawn, movement position gained. Family phrase says do not call the road by its right name after dark. The plate at the gate sits inside a household and presumes a road. A child's recollection notes an older boy went to walk the mud and show the ruts. The mother left a plate when wind came from the bend. The register lists runner from fort and no age. The chaplain omits that burial in his monthly return. The cemetery lot is described without personal markers. The ledger totals reconcile. The officer's wording is constant across letters. Help at hand, route obtained from local hands, rapid movement over difficult ground. Fewer animals spent. Fuel issue reduced in the morning. No engineers credited. No guide named. The phrases document a function and mute the actor. The recollections answer with procedure rather than biography. Do not write it. Remember it. Use kinship words. The past that would have been a protection becomes a liability in text. A subassistant asks for a pass system and lists reasons. The office acknowledges receipt and moves to other matters. A household records fold the pass in breadcloths. A justice writes service not set forth on rolls cannot be credited. A widow writes again. A note on the envelope years later says reopened insufficient. The actor remains inferred. The bridge between both layers is built with small instructions. Stand 2 fence posts back from the lane. Keep the light parallel to the ground. Wait for the second light at the bend. Sing low to carry the road. Do not call the road by its right name after dark. The instructions create a moving zone where writing would endanger the task. The papers describe the task after it is done. At the seam of silence, the record repeats itself. Road opened before daylight. Delivery outside hours. Runner from fort deceased. No engineers credited. Not found on rolls. No officer to swear the same. Inquest not undertaken. Reward advertisement placed. Order restored after disturbance. The events form a loop when read by month. The saying forms a loop when read by rule. The loop's overlay. The echo from part 1 returns in ordinary words. Fate unknown stands beside 2 names. Return stands beside a third. A burial without a stone appears in one book and not another. An officer transfers a forwarding address not provided. A petition receives a second stamp. A clerk's hand changes mid-page. The road remains in use and unnamed at night. The bend remains a place to wait. The river motif carries objects that do not announce themselves. A horse knows the ford by scent. A boy walks first and keeps his eyes on the ground. The map does not mark the boy. The freight timetable marks the result. The field worker who copied testimonies for a county project is later noted as missing on the same road. The notation is brief and unadorned. The paper record's absence without cause. The lantern motif settles on technique rather than display. One lid of tin. One hand over the mouth of light. One brief show to signal count reached. An inventory line returns a lantern with a lid damaged. The origin is unclear. A relief worker notes the same device in 2 counties without connecting the tellers. The object is ordinary. The method is what holds continuity. The drum motif holds a time that written minutes do not. When bridge alarms list no enemy, the drum appears in recollection as a measure for moving without speaking. When morning reports show a position gained before daylight, the drum appears in recollection as the touch that aligned bodies in space. When the list of survivors is blank, the drum appears as a memory of answer, not as sound on paper. The dream motif creates a standing place for missing returns. Second bend at dawn, a gate for listening, a plate waiting if the wind comes from the bend. The motif does not fill a line with a name. It occupies the span where the line would have held a name. Paper instructs no one to stand there. Memory positions the watcher where news might arrive if writing did not carry the person home. The crossing point emerges without announcement. Administrative files converge on movement supply, burial, denial, closure. Household and community recollections converge on rules that make such movement possible and such denial survivable. The statements do not argue with each other. They reflect and answer. One layer records functions without people. The other records methods without paperwork. The 2 together hold an act in place. No one writes the last proper name at the trestle. No one writes the proper name of the road after dark. No one writes the guard who first saw the sign. No one writes the runner's age. No one writes the guide who opened the mud before daylight. The instruments of writing continue to list totals and reconcile ledgers. The instruments of memory continue to enforce rules and place watchers. There is no crescendo available in this file except the repetition of ordinary entries at the highest density point. There is no flourish available in the sayings except the repetition of ordinary precautions at the highest risk point. The seam is quiet. The forms are stamped. The lines are copied. The rules are spoken again at the gate. The bend remains. The trestle remains. The plate remains. The light remains. This file was assembled from federal series, state and county papers, church registers, relief correspondence, and late interviews held in public repositories. The muster and return materials are preserved in the national holdings of the former War Department files. The quartermaster and subsistence ledgers are in the same system under logistics series. The Bureau of Refugees, Freedmen, and Abandoned Lands records are arranged by Assistant Commissioner and Sub-District. Pension case files with their affidavits and examiner memoranda remain in the National Pension Collections. State Adjutant annual reports are bound volumes in state libraries or archives. County dockets, coroner books, and provost correspondence are dispersed in courthouse basements, state archives, and microfilm runs created during mid-20th century surveys. Church registers consulted here are local holdings. Access was granted by congregations after request. Relief agency letters survive in denominational and university collections. The late oral testimonies, including verses and household practices, are held in state historical societies and National Library typescript sets created by field workers. The arrangement listed here is factual. It is included so that each category can be recovered and tested by another reader. The immediate provenance of the specific papers cited in the earlier parts is mixed. Morning reports and consolidated returns are original forms that moved from regimental and post offices to departmental custody and then to national custody. They retain dates, signatures, and the physical rhythm of daily recording. Quartermaster and subsistence ledgers are centralized books in which many hands entered totals and notations. Marginal comment is rare but present in some volumes. Bureau letters are copies and originals interfiled. The tone shifts from district to district, but the administrative vocabulary is stable. Pension files contain letters from claimants, depositions taken by examiners, and formal decisions. Envelopes sometimes bear later stamps indicating reopening. State adjutant abstracts summarize field letters and often omit the names supplied in the originals. County and coroner papers are prone to gaps. An inquest may be recorded in summary without investigative attachments. Church books are steady on rites and spare on incidentals. A burial of an unknown soldier from camp is usually a single line. Relief correspondence varies in detail. Some letter writers record procedures with care and others write in broad terms. Interview typescripts range from near verbatim to stylized dialect renderings. The physical custody today is clear. The human path from wartime action to repository description is not. No official inventory page found here lists a drum touched to mark time rather than beaten. No quartermaster ledger explains a lantern with a tin lid. No morning report records a plate left at a gate when wind comes from a bend. Yet these objects and practices recur in accounts taken independently in counties that did not share interviewers or denominational ties. The present file does not promote these recurrences to proofs of particular nights. It holds them as rules and instruments that made uncredited tasks possible. It also holds the administrative phrases that describe outcomes without actors. The two strands do not resolve, but they sit in parallel with enough density to avoid dismissal. The people whose names are explicit in the papers are principally officers, clerks, examiners, surgeons, quartermasters, and pastors. Their signatures anchor dates and places. The people whose functions are explicit and names withheld are guides, runners, watchers, and those called from camps to open roads before daylight. Their presence is deduced from movement, recorded messages, logged alarms, investigated, and positions gained. In affidavits submitted years later, some of these actors appear again with given names only. Examiner notes criticize the lack of surnames and the mismatch with role spellings. The criticism is procedurally correct inside a system that ties compensation to role entries. It is incomplete inside a world where hybrid service was discouraged from being written in the first place. Items remain missing. The pass rosters requested by sub-assistants for trustworthy night travelers are not attached. The original of a field letter praising local guidance is summarized without the names, and the appendices are absent. The provost memo that might have linked an alarm at a trestle with an injury noted in a county docket is not present in the surviving volume. A telegraph operator's log has the hour and the initials and the phrase "hand to wire." The officer's outgoing message book that might have matched content is not in the set consulted. A church book records one unknown burial from camp in a week, when the hospital register lists a runner from fort. The chaplain's monthly return for the same period reconciles totals without naming that burial. The negative spaces are logged here as such. The person who collated the late interviews in one county is named in a local history office register. That person is also named in a county project 2 decades later. A marginal note in the project's correspondence states that the field worker did not return from a routine journey between 2 settlements and was later marked missing. The road he traveled is the road that appears repeatedly in wartime files as a night path for messages and guidance. No cause is entered. No inquest is attached. The note is filed and not followed by another. This detail is retained only because it touches the collection path of testimonies now used to reconstruct rules. It is a present tense reminder that roads with layered uses also carry layered risk. The echo motifs identified earlier are restated here as inventory rather than symbol. Drum, a device touched to coordinate movement. Absent from the inventories and present in recollections that do not dramatize it. River bend and second light, a placement instruction for waiting and meeting. Absent from maps and present in song verses and dream motifs that distribute attentional discipline. Lantern with tin lid, a tool adapted to narrow and release light in measured intervals. Present in at least one equipment return as damaged lid, and present in 2 unrelated testimonies as a standard method. Plate at the gate, when wind comes from the bend, a household signal for unresolved return. Not an official act, but a practice that appears alongside entries that record runners without names. These items recur not to create atmosphere, but to account for how work was organized under pressure. The questions that remain unresolved are specific. Who opened particular roads before daylight on nights when no engineers are credited, and where are their names now? Which men or boys walked the mud first and returned by fence rows on the nights that quartermaster ledgers list shortened circuits? Who carried the message that caused minor ordnance and fuel adjustments after an operator logged delivery outside hours? Who stood as watcher at a lane counting wagons and did not look at faces? Which women folded passes in breadcloths and kept talk for night and spit it in the morning? These questions are not rhetorical. They are narrow requests for names attached to roles that the administrative record renders functional and anonymous. The present tense value of this file is limited but precise. It cannot assign identities to the unnamed actors barring new documents or local discoveries. It can, however, pin months, corridors, and administrative phrases to recurring functions, and it can show how household rules mirror those functions. It can note that in the high-pressure weeks of early 1865, along defined corridors, papers achieved outcomes with missing attributions and communities preserved techniques with missing names. It can show that petitions for recognition were rejected on procedural grounds that did not account for the conditions under which the original work had to occur. It can show that burials were recorded without surnames in one book and omitted in another, while totals reconciled bodies without identities. What is not argued here is also recorded. There is no claim that every movement by night involved uncredited black guidance. There is no claim that every assault recorded against travelers at night was related to courier work. There is no claim that every song verse is a cipher, or that every dream motif points to a specific event. The file holds only what can be read, patterns of logistics, patterns of denial, patterns of recollection, and a narrow overlap where practice and paper reflect each other without closing the gap. The refusal to exceed the documents is deliberate. The closing note returns to the first page's ordinary words. Fate unknown is written beside more than one entry. Returned appears beside another and is then struck. No survivors were found is a staff phrase that does not list all who were present in the hours before that phrase was written. Road opened before daylight without engineers credited is a ledger phrase that marks utility without authorship. Runner from Fort Deceased Burial in Civilian Ground is a hospital line that quiets a person into a corner of a page. The verses about second light and the instruction not to call a road by its right name do not unlock these lines. They sit beside them and keep attention where paper will not. This present tense narrator is not outside the problem. The act of assembling and reading imposes a shape and risks substituting coherence for names. The only legitimate endpoint available is a statement of scope and a record of gaps. The files will remain where they are: national stacks, state rooms, county shelves, church cupboards, denominational boxes, university collections, typed interview binders. Anyone can walk the same corridors and repeat or revise the sequence. If a name appears in a family Bible, a box in an attic, a church minute book not yet read, or a ledger missed by an index, the hinge of the story would change at that point. Until then, the functions remain more visible than the people who performed them. The echo is entered once more in ordinary language because ordinary language is how these papers were written. Drums answered by touch and not by beat. A second light at a bend that is not on a map. A lantern whose lid narrows what can be seen. A plate at a gate acknowledging that waiting is a task. A clerk's hand changing mid-page. A stamp that reads, completed. A widow who writes again. A line that holds only one word, returned. Maybe they didn't disappear. Maybe we did. The The thematic statement that follows is practical rather than ornamental. A record that saves outcomes and loses people is not complete. A memory that saves methods and loses dates is not sufficient. The work of a community and a country is to join the two until names stand where functions now stand, and the roads that carried knowledge by night can be read in daylight without removing the protections that once made those roads usable.